What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I am a game designer on the Summoner's Rift team on League of Legends. We are a team responsible for most of the patch notes you see every 2 weeks, here to give you a preview on what's coming into 13.18 in about 1 week. Branch cut was 8.5 hours ago today, and so let's talk about what we worked on and what is going on into the next patch. First things first. Some content. What's sort of broad strokes going on here. One is a brief chat about. So there's plenty that we worked on during the patch 13.18 sprint that is not going to be in patch 13.18. This is future patchwork. We'll talk about that in a later section. There is an update to Bard coming through one of the champion designers who want to do an update. We had some oversight on the SRT side, and we'll see if he needs follow-up afterwards, but I think some pretty exciting Bard changes. Overall, a set of follow-up on 13.17, because there were some fairly meaningful systems updates that were obviously going to have some fallout, and so we're addressing that fallout, and then some continued pro and solo queue updates as we are gearing up towards Worlds, and otherwise looking at things that we can just make better for solo queue. So first off, let's talk about, wow, it's a long scroll. Future patchwork. Okay, so this is basically the fact that we are working on some longer term projects, and right now, basically two things. One is many of the designers on SRT are working on preseason. I am not one of them. I am one of the few designers working exclusively on the live pod, on live balance and short term updates. But essentially, this is pretty intentional because we want to be low disruption heading into Worlds, but then land the larger projects immediately after the Worlds patch. So Worlds is on 13.19. The current plan is to land some larger projects in 13.20 that will hopefully make people happy, make the game better, and then tune that as needed throughout the end of the ranked season as we gear up then towards preseason and the game's disrupted again for season 2024. Okay, so the timing is again post Worlds, ETA hopefully 13.20 for this kind of stuff. Big set of changes. Number one is some anti-snowballing measures. Some context around this is back in the durability update in 12.10, it did a lot of good for the game. It slowed down combat. That was really positive. It made the game more skill expressive. In combat itself, it's good. Lower time to kill means you have more time to do things for counterplay, right? Then there had to be follow-up updates. I think 12.12, there was a suite of changes that helped make sure assassins could still do their jobs in a post-durability update world. It's important that assassins have really short time to kill. And then in 12.14, if my recollection is correct, there were a bunch of changes as follow-up from pro play, where pro got really, really, really slow and really, really stale, and it was exclusively hyper carry scale for late. You couldn't push laning phase, you couldn't punish any leads. There was no point in doing anything but scaling and playing really, really slow. And so there were a bunch of system updates then in 12.14. Those changes specifically had a really, really large impact in the degree to which games snowball, and like some amalgamation of gold leads and Drake leads and whatever, because we can essentially regress, how much an Infernal Drake turns into win rate, and et cetera, et cetera. Essentially, the game got really, really snowbally, and more than in recent history, the game is more snowbally, especially in really high elos, than it has been in recent history. So there's a set of changes trying to work that back. We'll talk more about it when it actually comes time for that. One of the other big projects is the fact that jungle is a very, very overpowered role. It's been this way for a while, but for a really long time, jungle has been a really unpopular role. And it's like, well, even if, and basically the thought process here, right, is like, hey, even if jungle is theoretically a balanced role, if it's unpopular, then the jungle still dictates who wins the game, because it turns out that the autofilled jungler always loses, and the jungle main always wins. And it's like, well, if, power often can bring satisfaction and popularity, we see this with champions plenty of times, you can get some decent movement that way. It's like, well, the jungle systems changes in 2023 season, I think were really good, and it continued the trend of jungle getting more popular up and to the right. But essentially, it's like there's this weird balance of, if we nerf jungle too heavily, people will quit jungle, and then it's back to people having auto-filled junglers, which means that you're still going to be you're going to be determined by which jungler's auto-filled. And it's like, well, that's not a good state either, right? And so kind of the entire point of live design is making the game as maximally fun as possible. And so it means that there is a consideration for the role being fun and interesting. Because, of course, like junglers matter, right? Their feelings matter, right? Junglers having fun matters. But even if you're a not jungler, you really want to make sure you have junglers in your games because otherwise you lose who gets autofilled, right? So it's a balance there, but there's a project on trying to lower the jungle power level without crushing jungle satisfaction too heavily. I think it's trending pretty well, and yeah, this hopefully ships in 13.20. And then, though it was promised earlier on in the year, this was kind of in a weird state. It changed hands quite a bit. Ultimately, now I own the Cassante changes, and this is also tested really well. So we have a decent set of kit updates to Cassante that should retain his identity as a highly skillful tank. Right, it's just it's a really unique niche in the game. Highly skillful tank, trying to improve the counterplay against him so that he doesn't. Basically, it's not a test of if Cassandra knows his patterns, then he automatically wins. And essentially, yeah, like retaining satisfaction, retaining the coolness of the kit, but increasing counterplay, and ultimately then lowering his pro skew, but making him stronger in the hands of most players. I think what we have right now is testing really, really well. And so, again, I think that we're going to be looking at for 13.20. But hey, it's not in this patch, but just want to talk about that. Hey, we're working on a bunch of bigger updates that you're not going to see for another month or so, but is still taking up plenty of our time, right? Anyway, we talk about what's going on in this patch itself, and first one is an update to Bard. This comes courtesy of Champions team with some oversight from SRT. I was personally the one attached to it, and so there's basically two sort of buckets of changes. So one is Bard's passive can stack to more max stacks. This is how much move speed you get from grabbing chimes around the map. Keep in mind that the passive stacks fall off once you enter combat. So he's gonna run really fast, and he autos you once, or you auto him once, and then off goes the passive stacks. But more move speed and more stacks on the passive. It's just gonna be pretty fun. Obviously, there's gonna be some power here, but it should be more fun than power is the kind of hope here. The second one is a reshaped W. So one thing that's true about Bard is that he is really elite skewed. He's like on the strong side in Masters Plus, and then last I checked, weak for the significant majority of players. Weak meaning his win rate's below 50%. Doesn't mean he's actually weak, just means maybe he requires a lot of mastery, or his output's really skewed, but whatever. As any champion, if you put in the mastery, you put in the time, basically every champion is 50% win rate or higher if you put in the time to learn them well. And so, some of this is like win rate is fake because every champ can actually be good. You just have to be good at the champion, right? Anyway, a reshape the W is going to very, very lightly undo some of the skew is the hope here. The goal is primary satisfaction, but hey, if we get some skew out of it, that's great. That's pretty great. So the first thing is that Bard W is now going to have 2 ammo, but the cooldown, or I guess now the cooldown per ammo, is going up. And so you can get 2 hot cocos out really quickly, but the time the funny thing is because you're walking around with 2 stacks, you're pretty much always going to get your 3rd one faster as well. But essentially, you're certainly going to get more W's out. It's just like the function is you're going to get more W's out. And these W's charge faster. They're going to charge over 5 seconds instead of 10, which is, of course, pretty powerful. And so the overall value of putting shrines on the ground is going to be much higher because you're going to have more shrines, and they're going to be sort of, more readily used at full power. However, there's a compensation nerf. This is going to read as power like neutral or an adjustment, but it is almost certainly an actual nerf because Bard doesn't really buy ability power. His builds are all tanky right now. And essentially that the base move speed of shrines is getting nerfed until rank 5 of the ability. Or you need I forget the actual number, but you need more than just your support item for this to break even at rank 4. So essentially, the elite skew part of this is good bards will just press W on you and just give you move speed and say, congratulations, you run fast. And more inexperienced bards don't understand that's actually a really, really core part of the power of the champion is just donating move speed, willy-nilly. Now, certainly, again, at any given team fight, Bard now has 2 W instead of 1, and so even if the move speed is lesser, you can give out move speed to 2 people. But in terms of hey, learnability, what's going on here, waiting for shrines is less bad. You can put down more shrines. Again, there's quite a lot of power here. We'll follow up as needed with Bard, but I think these are overall changes that are pretty cool for the champion. So a small update to Bard. Great. Next big bucket of changes are some follow-ups to patch 13.17. There's some things that certainly landed too strong, some things by a little bit, some things by kind of a lot. Let's talk about them. Okay, so first up, Spear of Shojin. I expected Spear of Shojin to be pretty overpowered. I personally believe that it is correct for especially systems updates. I think less so with champions because champions are like very obvious. But with systems updates, it takes a long time for players to understand how good things are. And I personally believe, and this is just like my opinion, but this happened here, is that I think it's okay to launch a system slightly too strong and then walk it back to the appropriate power level very quickly. And the shock of slightly too much power says, oh, pay attention, this item's good, go try this, right? So for example, Hecarim, like previous patch, I think like his fourth most common first item was Shojin, and now this patch is his first most common for like starting item. But it has been his best first item for the entire time, right? It just like took a really huge shot in the arm to teach Hecarim players, no, really, you can rush this, like go buy this thing first, and then yeah, sure, your tier whatever, like that got pushed around as well, but it's like no, really, actually go buy this thing. And even then, like if you look at like day one pick rates, Shojin was still behind Duskblade in pick rate. If you look today, it's clearly number one, and like players have learned, but it's like you kind of need a really big push to get people to change behaviors if you want that behavior to change quickly. I value that change becoming quickly because hey, even if Hecarim is like a theoretically more powerful champion, the experience of playing against Hecarim who doesn't turn untargetable is probably a fair experience for his opponents than a Hecarim with 1 or 2% higher win rate than like would otherwise, be normal, right? So there's a certain amount of that where I think it's like, even if he's like actually stronger, which is true, Shojin's an overpowered item. I think there's a very easy sell that frustrating champion. I think that is a very easy sell. Like win rate is not frustration. It's actual, play, right, is frustration. So that thought process, I think, is relevant. I think that process is worth talking about. What's next? We see Jarvan buy this item. Obviously, it's very, very good on him, but like Jarvan is clearly an incredibly good user of this item. None of his basic abilities, as far as I know, are tagged as hard CC, so they all get full value of the ability haste. And so yeah, Jarvan has an item that he's very, very happy to buy. But Jarvan is very happy to buy an item with 500 health on it, right? This ensures that Jarvan is being played more as a frontliner and not as lethality burst guy. The overall health of the champion, I think, good for that. The overall health of the game, good for that. Xin Zhao is now going on his item quite a bit. That's great. Xin Zhao is a fairly frontliney type champion. He dives in, doesn't have good ways out. This guy kind of needs to have a lot of durability to do his job very well. Cool. And it's like this item is strong enough that we're getting players to like really go, oh, this item is for me. Cool, I'm going to buy this item is good. I think that's useful. So indeed, Shojin was a bit overpowered. One thing I want to talk about with system changes is like the thought process here, and I think this is a very defensible rule of thumb, is that like systems kind of have to come first, and then you balance champions downstream of the systems. Like, imagine we're never allowed to buff Shojin because we know it's a pretty good Hecarim item, even though he only buys it in 14% of his games. It's like, then this item is not successful. If it's meant to be a widely used fighter item, and it's meant to be part of the fighter ecosystem of items that people can buy and feel good about it, then we have to acknowledge this if we buff this item and bring it up to the forefront as a good fighter item that fighters are willing to buy, this must mean Hecarim gets more powerful. And we have to accept that and say, okay, well, we will nerf Hecarim knowing that his best in slot item is getting stronger, because the item has to have a certain power level to be usable for the class instead of just for Hecarim. I think that is a very defensible sort of system for designing these kinds of things, and it means that later on there's a change to Crowd the Shatter Queen in this patch. Again, Shojin has happened, Gordrinker's in the previous patch, Stryberger's in the previous patch. It's like these items should be put in a spot where these items are good, and then we react. Maybe we do it preactively. I mean, in the case of Hecarim, we did it proactively to his W. In the case of Jarvan, we're doing it this patch though. In the case of Xin Zhao, he seems fine. But yeah, this sort of like, on the one hand is yes, this item potentially a little bit overtuned because I really, really want people to notice this item is good, and I think it takes too long for players to realize this otherwise. And then the other is, okay, How too good is the item? Only a little, minus 5 AD. Let's move on. Next is Jarvan. As mentioned, Jarvan is doing too well. He is a natural Gore Drinker user and a natural Shojin user. Two of his best items both got buffed. This champion basically gained 250 health on 2 items. That is clearly very powerful. He gained some haste because Shojin's very good on him. Yeah, not a surprise here that Jarvan was a big winner. So Jarvan's passive was nerfed from 10% to 8% back in... I forget when it was, but relatively recently, and it ended up being almost exactly 1.5% win rate. So we're doing it again here, which is going to be another roughly 1.5% win rate is the expectation. Plus 5 AD off Shojin, it's automatically by second. This should have a pretty solid magnitude towards Jarvan. I'm guessing 1.8 to 2% win rate, which is more than comfortable. I think it'll still be above 50, which is fine. I don't think it's bad if Jarvan is like on slightly the strong side of junglers. That is okay. And overall, no reason to overnerf this guy. I think he's totally reasonable. And yes, a good, 1-2 to Jarvan. Shojin is a bit overtuned, and Jarvan himself a little bit too strong as well. No problem. Next is Red Kayn. So in the previous patch, I mentioned how our goals were to nerf Blue Kayn and Red Kayn together. But because Blue Kayn didn't get any compensation via item systems, right? I guess Duskblade got arguably a little bit weaker, but it's not a very big deal. Red Kayn got a buffed Gore Drinker. And so a mix of Gore Drinker getting 100 health and him losing some W damage, Red Kayn lost 0.1% win rate in all elos. So... there was no actual Red Kayn nerf, and our express goal was we should nerf Red Kayn, so we're doing that. The goal here is basically what we wanted last time, which is about 1.5% win rate, since we got none of it last time around. The hope is to slightly low elo skew these changes here to Kayn. That tends to mean that late game power tends to be low elo skewed. Low elo games go longer. I think it's valuable if the Kayn forms are equally valid and equally powerful. What's nice, it's actually very easy for us on our end to separate Red Kayn versus Blue Kayn. They're like literally classes different champions essentially for our bookkeeping purposes. So I'm aware that Blue Kayn doesn't have significant elo skew, but Red Kayn does. I'm aware of the winners of each one. It's very straightforward on our side. And say, okay, Red Kayn is doing too well, especially in Lore and Mars. And so what's happening is the healing via his passive, and his passive is percent physical damage dealt to champions post mitigation. That is changing from, I believe it's 20 to 30% based on character level to just a flat 25%. Keep in mind that Kayn doing pretty well evolves at level 8. And honestly, you could never get level 1 through 6 healing, right? So the functional healing on Red Kayn passive is 24 to 30% by champion level, and this is going to be 25% flat. It is a late game healing nerf. It is the opposing team is really uncoordinated, and so Kayn is constantly in 2v2s and 3v2s and drain tanking and turbo winning the game. His sort of individual snowballiness, I think, is a very low elo skewed lever. So I expect this change to have a disproportionate impact on lower MMRs. In general, my current thought process, and maybe this will evolve over time, my current thought process is that just fighters who drain tank is just a very dangerous pattern, because if they win by a little, they win by a lot, and there's no counterplay. You can't burst them. This guy goes untargetable. This guy has crowd control. This guy has escape. He has 2 ways to get over walls. He has multiple ways to drop your targeting, and then he drain tanks you, and he's unburstable, and he actually has really high damage. And it's now, Kayn is only slightly too strong, and not by a large degree by any means. This champion is not inherently flawed and the kid is horrible and whatever. It's just this champion's a bit too strong, and this champion often eats a lot of ban rate, and I suspect a lot of it is because he will drain tank your team, and that's kind of frustrating. And so I wanted to nerf his late game healing because, hey, if your healing is a function of damage dealt, well, your damage is going to go up with time anyway. Red Kayn actually has very, very aggressive AD ratios, and his damage scales with enemy champion max health, which also natively scales with game time, so he doesn't need a further lever that multiplically scales late game by scaling with his AD, scaling with enemy champion health growth, and then scaling with char level on the healing coming through. I think he doesn't need all these multipliers, and so flattening out, I think, is a very reasonable thing here for Red Kayn, and should be totally fine. The second change here is the bonus AD ratio on the R. So the thing here is essentially 2 thoughts. So one, he did just get a bunch more healing via the fact that right? Gore Drinker got buffed. He has more max HP, which means it's, more likely he's going to be able to use this very well. More time to reactivate, more time to get a second spell rotation out, right? Like max HP is a spell vamp lever for Kayn because he might live to cast another spell and then get another health back that way, another 100 health back that way, right? So like, it's even reasonable in keeping here to like actually nerf his healing to some degree. Anyway, the thing I wanted to get to is my belief right now is that ultimates should have so it's sort of a longer term thought, and like certainly not all this is currently implemented in the game, and maybe it's correct long term, maybe it's not, but it's like, here's my thought process essentially, right? Is I think ultimates should have a very strong amount of upfront value, and like arguably ults should be slightly stronger baseline than they are right now on live. They should have relatively mediocre scaling, so that whether you're ahead or behind, your ult is strong to very strong, no matter your gold income, which means, right, higher base, lower ratios. And 3, our ults might actually need longer cooldowns. Now, certainly, we've shipped a lot more ability haste into the game, but I think to some class that is more than reasonable. I think fighters should, on average, be allowed to have a lot of ability haste as a core stat. Because how are fighters meant to express themselves with gold? Well, they can gain more damage, and if they gain damage without getting ability haste, they become burst assassins, right? They're allowed to gain health, which they do, and that's good. And I've, as you may have seen from the recent couple of patches, I've been trying to give fighters more health, oftentimes as compensation of flat damage, right, to make them more extended fight champions. They're allowed, damage mitigation. We look at things like Death's Dance, look at things like Guardian Angel being pretty, decent items overall. Ma, right, here's a fat shield, here's a steric shield, right, just damage mitigation, not necessarily just flat health, but damage mitigation. To some degree, healing, I think that is a very scary lever, but ones that are relatively well constrained. So Gore Drinker can't really go infinite. Its healing doesn't scale very hard off of how much gold you're gaining. It's just kind of baseline reliable. Death's Dance is a bit more baseline reliable. I'm glad the AD ratio on that item got nerfed. But to some degree, self-healing I think can be successful and accessible on fighters. But anyway, to kind of go back to the point, there is a lot of ability haste in the game, but I think fighters, more than any other class in the game, maybe tied with tanks, I think should be allowed to lay claim to having high amounts of haste. I think that is, if you're giving fighters something, haste seems like the kind of stat it should be allowed to get, because fighters are about their spells as well as their auto attacks, and if you put all the damage in flat AD, they become burst mages, and if you give them a healthy amount of ability haste, they get to have multiple rotations, right? And multiple rotations is how you get a healthy fighter pattern. In general, sort of broad strokes here, every champion is different, of course, but anyway, this circles back to, hey, Red Kayn's bonus AD ratio on his R is really, 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 really high, and I don't think his ult needs to also scale with gold income. One final weird diatribe on gold income. My current theory on pro-skewed junglers is that the junglers that people play in pro are the ones that don't need gold to function. So if you look, and you can look at this with public data, if you go to like Games of Legends, and you look at like gold per minute, and just sort by pick rate, and then look at the gold per minute column, and like compare mid laners to bot laners to top laners to junglers, and in almost all cases, it's very clearly bot lane gets the most gold, then mid lane, then top, then jungle. The jungle is like very clearly fourth place in gold on average overall for the role in pro play. Junglers in pro play sacrifice gold. They just don't earn it. And it's why we pretty rarely see things like Graves and Ezreal jungle, although oftentimes it's because those champions snowball at beating the enemy jungler. It's why we so often see Maokai Sejuani. It's why we see the like Wukong and Vi builds are tanky. It's like one item Radiant Virtue because they're only going to get 2 items and they're going to stop earning gold. And so I think potentially like some longer term pass on normalizing jungler gold income and like gold scaling specifically is how we can unpro jail a lot of our junglers. Like, for example, we don't see Hecarim in pro play at all. But we used to see Hecarim, we used to see him a few years ago, back when Hecarim's build was like turbo chem tank into nothing, and he was just there to engage team fights, because any jungler can get to one item, and then I'm just here to apply crowd control, nothing matters. And then when Hecarim got reshaped and having a ton of AD ratios, he disappeared from pro with the exact same solo queue win rate. And I think we're seeing, very similar things here with other junglers right now, where, the champs who don't need gold income are the ones we see in pro play. There's a chance that, for example, the reason we're seeing Ivern so much in the LEC is we lowered the gold scaling of Ivern pretty substantially in patch 13.15, and maybe LEC is being interesting, and they just really like their strange junglers here. But, it's probably not a huge accident that in the patch that we made Ivern scale less strongly with gold income, he became a really big pick in one of the best regions of the world in pro play, right? So, and LEC generally is pretty not dumb at drafting. Like, they're usually pretty smart about what kind of stuff is actually good. I mean, the fact that they're playing a bunch of Callista's actually pretty good, so, we'll see. But anyway, yeah, a couple random thoughts there. Going off on various tangents. This is a patch preview. Let's get back on topic. So Tryndamere indeed did land too strong. We gave Tryndamere 50 attack range and then lowered his base AD by 4. He definitely gained more power than we wanted. Tryndamere being around 50% win rate is fine, but he's at like 51 and change. We're aiming at about 1.5% win rate off for this champion right now. And so 2 levers. One is minus a bunch of health growth, and then one is minus some base AD. I believe this brings the minus AD to 6, because it was 4 in the previous patch, and it's minus 2 here. Turns out my first instinct of minus 5 AD would have been closer to right, but whatever, it's fine. So random aside, it still wouldn't have been enough, to be fair. He gained a lot of win rate off of the bonus attack range. So the minus health growth is interesting. Tryndamere right now has among the highest health growth in the game. Bringing this down somewhat toward normalcy, I think, is reasonable. I am a fan of sort of exceptions for exceptional cases, and otherwise I like normalizing things when there's not a good reason not to. At least for boring things like base stats, right? This is like, hey, should your champion have less than 325 or more than 355 move speed? Because that is the like hard bracket on every champion of the game. And it's like, well, exactly unmounted Rel and unmounted Kled have below 325. Because the point is to like sell the move speed difference. Okay, that's an exceptional case where they literally transform as part of their kit. Makes sense. Meanwhile, mounted Rel gets like essentially a bunch of free flat move speeds, which becomes the fastest base like non-active champion of the game. Also reasonable. She's literally on a horse. Right? Like, here's an exception for an exceptional case. But like, ooh, this champion has really extreme base stats. Mininar vs Meganar. Totally reasonable. Mininar has the worst stats in the game. Meganar has the best stats in the game. Yep, makes sense. So that even if you build full tank, Mininar is still not that tanky, and Meganar, if you build full fighter, is still actually going to function as a full line tank. Yep, this makes sense. Exceptional cases for an exceptional champion, right? But outside of that, I am a fan of pushing towards the middle. This actually then long term gives us more room to have the exceptions once again. Because like, oh, actually, Meganar's stats, they're still below this champion over here who's in a weird state, right? So again, I like push towards the middle when it makes sense to. It's worth noting that Tryndamere losing health growth is probably going to be less effective than it would be on any other champion, right? For a normal melee champion, your health is very, very important. Your health is how you live. Tryndamere always lives, 5 seconds? Beyond his death, no matter what it would be. So for a normal champion, if you died 10% faster, they would deal about 10% less damage. For Tryndamere, he's going to die 2% faster because he's going to add 5 seconds no matter what happens. Aside from like miss time of the ulti, which can happen a very little bit, sure, but like generally speaking, right? So this won't be a hugely effective lever, but it is still good. I think bringing Tryndamere down to normal to even below average health for a melee champion is more than reasonable, since his passive is, or his ultimate is, I literally can't die. I think it's reasonable if he doesn't also have above average baseline durability, right? That to me makes sense, so I think it's a pretty reasonable change overall. Next, again, is just some minus AD. Not much to say here, right? It's some fairly simple levers. I think these all directionally make sense, though, right? Lowering more of his early game all-in pressure. He now, instead of having like the second or third highest AD in the game, he's going to go down to like 5th or 6th or something. Again, he still gets 10 AD on Q. There was some consideration around trying to reshape him off of Qmax being as optimal as it is. I don't know if this is going to go anywhere. It's a thought. Either way, we'll see what happens here. I hope we don't have to do follow-up further on Tryndamere, but anyway, just trying to put his balance state into a normal spot. Next change, right? Because that's basically the fallout changes, right? Tryndamere, Jarvan, items, Kayn. So we have a big suite of miscellaneous changes. This is a mix of things for solo queue as well as things for pro play, knowing that Worlds is coming up. The weird thing about Worlds balancing is that LEC has been playing on patch 13.15. Every other league played on 13.13 or 13.14. And from what I read online, Asia Games is going to be on 13.12. So there will be 5 patches between LCK and LCS playoffs and Worlds, and 4 patches between LEC playoffs and Worlds. And it makes it really hard for us as designers because we can't know what pro thinks about, let's say, Kai'Sa, for example. So right now, if you look at LEC, they're really big on Kalista, they're really big on Xayah, and then like Kai'Sa has a reasonable pro presence as like the number 3 or 4 AD carry. Okay. In like exactly LCK, they're really, really, really big on Zeri. But last time we saw an LCK only pick was Caitlyn before MSI, where they played post-nerf Caitlyn to a 70% presence in LCK playoffs, and then she was 0% presence at MSI. Is that going to be the case here with Zeri, or is it not? And we don't know. We don't have, there's no point 15, point 16, there's no way to react to this. Zeri wasn't the top dog, and then now in exactly Korea she is. This is a problem. It's hard to know, and we have to kind of guess. We've had multiple Caitlyn buffs since these postseasons. We're pretty sure Caitlyn's in a good spot. We've had Lucian buffs since these postseasons. We think Lucian's in a good spot. Kalista is actively getting played in the LEC. Draven is currently very good in Challenger and gets some play in the LEC as well. It's like, we're pretty confident there are a lot of good lane bullies, but no way to test those theories because Pro hasn't changed patches in over a month. And that makes it tough to know. Do we need to do more Pro changes, or is the theoretical bot lane meta in a good spot now with Lucian, Kalista, Draven, and Caitlyn all good, and we're not about hyper carries anymore, right? If it's like, actually, it's a lane bully meta, and sometimes they play Xayah and Zeri, that's a very healthy bot lane meta. Versus right now, it's Xayah, Zeri, because none of the lane bullies are good. But we don't know. And that makes it very, very tough. So there's going to be a lot of judgment calls here. We've got a few changes here in 13.18. We'll do a few more in 13.19. And then fingers crossed that we have a really interesting and diverse and exciting metagame for the World Championship on 13.19. Let's go into the individual changes as they are. So first up is Static Shiv. We'll start here. I goofed, honestly. I wish I knew more when I was designing the reimplementation of Static Shiv back in 12 or 13.10. I made mistakes. Right, that's the short of it. I made mistakes. The first version of Static Shiv that hit live actually had pretty reasonable minion damage numbers. It was like around 130 damage to minions at like character level 7. It scaled pretty aggressively to like high 300s, maybe 400, I think, by level 18. But that would be a more reasonable number where the numbers are actually quite low. But back then, I really wanted items to scale. The thought process was, okay, Static Shiv and Storm Razor and Kraken Slayer are, their first items, right? Their first item, Noon Quiver builds. These are for AD carries to buy first. Okay, fine. And I was like, well, you know what? They'll be balanced as first items, but I'm going to make them scale so that when you're on 4 items or 5 items, you still might consider buying Kraken Slayer or Static Shiv. Like if your build was going to be Blade of the Ruin King into Rage Blade into Wits and you're like, what do I buy fourth? And you're like, actually, that Kraken Slayer still looks good. I'm going to go buy that. Or if you're like, yeah, I went Rage Blade into Gnasher's Tooth, and you know what? That Static Shiv AP ratio, that's looking tasty. I'm going to buy that third. That was like what I was hoping for with these changes. Said, well, I can make these items enticing third or fifth, whatever, by giving them kit hooks with things like AP ratios for Rageblade Nashor's builds, by giving them significant character level scaling with things like Kraken Slayer and Shiv had that as well. And at the time, I was like, yeah, I'll just throw a minion mod on the Shiv PvP damage, because why not? I'll just multiply it by a ratio. It's very easy to understand. Yeah, it's just this number, then times 2, times 2.2, times 2.5, whatever, right? And the other thing was I had this internal rubric for okay, well, ostensibly, if I'm designing items well and items are balanced, they're going to have pretty good gold efficiency, and then the rest of the power of the item is going to be in the unique passive. That way, you don't buy item A because the stats are better than item B. You buy item A because the unique passive suits you better than item B. And so I'm going to balance these items to have roughly the same total value of stats. The profiles may shift, right? Kraken Slayer has more attack speed, the Energized has more attack damage. Of course, right? The stat line makes sense for the item, sure, right? That's still good, but it's like, well, if they have the same gold value of stats and the same cost, that means, well, they're balanced if the unique passes are the same power level. But the problem is, and this is my mistake, one, I think items giving extra scaling to, especially to marksmen. I think items giving scaling can be fine, but items giving scaling to marksmen who already multiplicity scale off items themselves because of how many multipliers they have was just wrong, right? And if someone said firmly, David, we are, I'm putting my foot down, you are not allowed to make the item scale, marksmen already scale really hard, I'd been like, okay, and I would have made them flat. And this is not like to blame my team. I was given the opportunity to fail, and I did, and I've learned, and sort of were like, yeah, okay, these effects, at least on marksmen especially, should not scale as hard. Okay, lesson learned, let's make a better item. And then two, theoretically, Kraken Slayer and Shiv are equally powerful on the current live game for marksmen. If you look at, like, across all bot lane marksmen, the pick rate for Kraken and Shiv first item is relatively close together. The win rates are relatively close together. These items are pretty balanced and pretty equally popular. I think it's kind of funny that, like, I'm going to go do my Reddit flame again. That, like, 2 months ago, I remember getting the feedback that Static Shiv was a bad item. Like, nope, this item is strong. And, like, the pick rate just kind of kept climbing patch over patch. Like, Static Shiv hasn't been buffed for 80 carries since, like, 0.13, I think. It's been, like, 2 months. And just the pick rate kept climbing. People realized, like, yep, actually, Shiv is a good item. Caitlyn has finally overtaken Shiv over Stormrazor as first item. They've finally realized the item is good. Just like players learn over time. It takes them a long time, but they get there, right? But like, I didn't buff Shiv for 80 carries for a long time because indeed this item wasn't underpowered. Turns out it's actually maybe a little bit overpowered. But the lesson that I'm now getting to is, hey, that's cute that you want to balance these items by saying their stat lines are going to be equally powerful. And so that means that if these items are equally powerful, their uniques should be equally powerful. Not all uniques are created equally. At the end of the day, that's just kind of true. So Static Shiv's unique doesn't need to carry that much actual power to be impactful. That's kind of weird because ultimately impact is power. Like that's they're kind of not possible to separate really. But ultimately, this doesn't have to do that much damage to do something meaningful to you, right? If it affects your ability to wave clear, if it gives you the ability to get priority when you wouldn't have otherwise, if it, just does these things for you, if it revitalizes your ability to play Quinn or frickin' LeBlanc of all things, then hey, this is going to do something meaningful for you. And it's okay if Shiv is actually higher stats and less unique passive than Kraken Slayer, which is low stats, but really, really, really strong unique passive. Ultimately, that's fine. And I tried to, ultimately, yeah, look, I think it's good at first glance to try to, our first pass is let's go try to have equal, stat lines and then go into unique passive land. But ultimately, I just should have been paying more attention to the actual throughput of the unique passive. I mean, the Static Shiv that we launched in 13.10 had pretty much nowhere close to this level of minion damage. And it has crept it up over time because in my mind, it's the PvP damage is already very high. It doesn't have to go any higher. The stat line is already tied with Kraken Slayer. That doesn't have to go any higher. So the only thing we can change is the minion damage. And just I was wrong, right? This number may still be too high. But I'm hoping that this is a reasonably well-shaped Static Shiv. It does not scale here anymore. If Shiv comes out next patch and it's still OP, we can nerf it again. I feel really badly that in basically since 12.10, it's been in the patch notes all but 2 patches. And it's I goofed. Let's be clear. I goofed, right? I made mistakes in designing this item. I made mistakes in tuning the item. I did not do this unilaterally, right? We shipped it as a team. I did not say, no, screw your feedback. We're pushing the minion damage to 300. But hey, I goofed. I should have known more. I know more now, at least. We try to improve. As compensation, though, for minus 50 to 150 minion damage on the Energized, it gets plus 5 AD. The goal is to be relatively power neutral. I don't mind if it's power down slightly. I think it's okay if Static Shiv ends up being the 3rd most common AD carry first out of Legendary. I think that is totally fine. It is certainly the most warping of item patterns, so if it's the niche option, I think it's totally reasonable. Let's move forward. Next item change is Stormrazor. Stormrazor getting plus 5 AD. This is essentially realizing that after the item shakeups from, I think it was 13.12, in 13.12 we did a big sweep to make items scale less hard with gold. Again, this is like, I understand that, like, hey, especially in the marksman system, your items need to scale nearly as hard because your champion already scales with gold plenty. Your items have to add ratios to your kit. Your kit's already got plenty of ratios. So I tried to reshape Stormrazor. Ultimately, Stormrazor is a bit undertuned. So it's plus 5 AD. This ends up being a pretty good amount of power. Honestly, this is actually quite a bit of power to get plus 5 AD. This ends up being a direct Jhin buff. I know Caitlyn's already shifted over to mostly buying Shiv instead of Stormrazor, but Caitlyn can just go back to Stormrazor here and feel good. Of course, Stormrazor also, keep in mind, his energized damage does have a total AD ratio. It actually increases the energized damage by 1.25. It's small, but it does exist. Anyway, yes, Stormrazor plus 5 AD ends up being a little bit more on the energized proc there as well. And this item's been undertuned. We bring it back, and if Stormrazor is now the generic number 2 crit legendary, and Shiv is number 3, cool, that's probably good. Kraken Slayer, I think, is a very healthy item. Its pattern is just the auto attack pattern, right? Kraken Slayer, despite having a really, really strong unique passive, is a pretty healthy item overall. Like, it's shaped really well. I'm really happy with how the item ended up turning out after getting it off of true damage. I'm actually really happy with Kraken Slayer as an item overall. Next is a moderate reshape to Crown of the Shattered Queen. So this got spawned by it first got spawned by a Reddit thread being like, hey folks, we're seeing Azir in pro play. And we're certainly seeing Azir in pro play, right? That said, Azir is maybe tied with Orianna, the flashiest pro play mage. Like, I would much rather have Azir be the premier magic damage pick in mid lane than Corki or Victor or probably even Veigar. Like, Veigar is interesting, but Veigar has very low volatility in game states. Now, Azir is probably a little bit overpowered, don't get me wrong, right? Like, you want there to be a breadth of options. Like, I'm watching Niski play 5 straight Azir games, and I'm like, well, one, it's not getting banned away because they don't care enough. They don't think he's important enough to get him off to his second favorite champion. But two, Azir seems generic enough that he can pick it into every matchup, which, okay, that's not great. But the primary thing is I basically just like, okay, well, I'm going to go look at what Azir's doing. And in solo queue, Azir is building Crown about as often as he builds Leanders or Ludens. Like, it's like 50% pick rate on him. It's like 55, I think. But, like, it's about as often as the offensive purchases. There was not a single other champion in the game with a pick rate on Crown over 15%. So Azir is more than triple as likely to build Crown as any other champion in the game. So clearly Crown is not serving as a valuable generic mage item and is really just an Azir item. And I talked about this earlier with Shojin, where it's like, well, if you only have one user, we should try to reshape this item somewhat. And so the goal is to, and to follow up the thought on pick rate, by the way, is, as I said, in solo queue, Crown pick rate on Azir is like 55%. In pro play, it's 75%. In pro, they basically only build Crown. And to me, I identified a really strong piece here, especially from like watching the games play out and like watching some of the Azir escapes. It's like, so you are functionally invulnerable during the 1.5 second duration of Safeguard. You are functionally invulnerable. Azir actually has relatively high baseline durability stats. His health growth is pretty solid. His armor is pretty solid. This champion is very functional. Okay, sure. Great. What about it? Well, it means that you cannot kill him in those 1.5 seconds, which means in pro play, where players and teams are really well coordinated, where Lee Sin goes for the flash insec, where Rel or Rakan do their flash RW combos. Weird that both of them have a flash RW combo. Teams will burst during that CC window, which lasts about 1.5 seconds, at which point Azir presses R, and then off he goes. And it turns out that that's really, really pro skewed, because pros are really good at dumping damage during the Rel combo, during the Rakan combo, during the Thresh hook, during the Lee Sin in-flight movement, or the Tristana Alistair alley-oop like we saw last weekend. Like, Pros are really good at using tight timing windows to do things all together. Regular players in solo queue are not, right? Like, that's just not how it works. And so it's like, well, actually, if you are basically half the DR during the Rel or Recon combo, then you are basically twice as likely. Math is, I'm being a little wonky in the math here. But if you basically block half the damage that you would have during the Raquel, the Raquel? Sure, the Raquel combo, then if your mother only knew. Anyway, let's get back on topic. Sorry. This is going to be much less impactful in pro play, where people are coordinated and use these tight timing windows, these tight burst windows. Whereas in solo queue, you actually might block the same amount of total damage, or maybe even slightly more total damage, with a weaker, more extended version of the effect. I think that is likely true. I think that is likely to be true. And so I think this change actually buffs it for almost all of us playing at home, and nerfs it for Azir in pro. Now, is this a silver bullet that gets Azir to not be the number one mage in pro play? I don't know. Honestly, I'll be paying attention. I'll be paying attention to the data. There's there's totally reasonable chance that, hey, we do some Azir changes in 13.19, but this change would never happen in 13.19. It's happening here. We'll measure what happens as a result of the patch. The Monday after it comes out, we'll meet, look at data, and move on from there, right? But the goal is actually a stronger and more effective item in solo queue and a less effective item in pro play, at least in like the Azir anti-Recon case, right? Okay. The next thing, though, is this reshape, which I've tested well immediately, and I'm like, oh, this is the right choice for sure. So, to be clear, the point of poise, I think the intent here was good. I think the intent was very, very good, which was, right, because keep in mind, the design intent of Mythics, right, was to make them broad and appealing to as many classes of, like, as many champions as possible to promote choice. Like, that was the design intent, or one of the design intents. It was one of the pillars, though, of Mythics, of these items, was to say, and basically it's like, so for example, right, if you're Xerath or Vel'Koz, it is very, very unlikely for you to lose Safeguard, which means you're very, very likely to have poise on at all points in time. Which means that this item, as a comparison to Luden's Tempest or Liandry's Torment, is actually pretty good because, I just always have 30 extra ability power because I'm Vel'Koz and I'm not getting hit anyway. Meanwhile, I'm playing Victor, and I expect to lose this passive a bit more, but I'm going to use this passive more. And so Victor cares more about this, and Vel'Koz cares more about that, and so the item has two sets of users. Right? And that design intent makes total sense. It's totally logical, and it probably does nudge in that direction. But as I mentioned, not only are we removing mythics, so the entire goals around breadth on items is kind of going out the window. Now, again, things like Shoji need to be good enough to be usable on many champions. It's why I'm kind of hoping to buff Crown. It should be usable on many champions, but sort of less explicitly saying, can we be as wide as possible, and saying, let's make this item good at something. It's okay that item has a niche, right? And this niche is, I'm getting dove by a Vi or a Hecarim. I would like to not die during Crowstorm's Fear, please. But also, let's make the item just easier to use overall. It's not the artillery mage item. It's there for your mid-range mages who are going to get the shield poked off, and it needs to be a reliable, solid durability item that has a bit of an anti-dive skew. I think that is more than reasonable. And so shifting poise to flat AP, I think, is a pretty solid change. There was a brief consideration. It was suggested to me that we lower the health in this item from 250 to 200, which just matches Kindle Gem. There's no bonus health on Combine. I thought about it and just like, I didn't have a good sell for that. I didn't really want to lower the health by 50 and then give it another 5 or 10 AP, which would have been a reasonable compensation change. Just to me, it muddies what this item is about. Like, this item is meant to be the more durable version of Luden's, Liandry's, whatever, right? Hey, here's Everfrost with the active that roots. Well, it's got the stat line of Everfrost more or less, but it's got Safeguard. Plus 15 AP is reasonable trade-off for poise. I mean, I don't know how often it's going to be up overall. It certainly feels a lot better to never lose these stats in a team fight. It feels great to not lose part of the item just because like the jungler spited you or you took a Sivir W or Static Shiv hit you, whatever, right? Like it's so easy to lose this thing that not losing your offensive power as well is just like it tested really well, and instantly that was from version 1 of this change that got kept. Anyway, yeah, the hope is that this item gets broadened somewhat. People are going to enjoy this item a bit more, and it's going to anti-pro skew it a bit. That we'll see if we still want to choose to make some Azir changes later on. Then we go into more generic changes. These are just a slew of champion buffs coming in. These are champions who generally are not doing very well in solo queue, and we think there's a chance that we see them in pro play as a result as well. So Aurelia gets some ult cooldown. This puts her ult cooldown at like sort of normal top laner ults. Like this pretty closely mirrors things like Malphite and Hecarim. I know Hecarim's not a top laner, but like this is a pretty standard fighter tank ulti kind of cadence. So minus 15 flat seconds off the cooldown. I think it's 125 to 85, I think is what it ends up as, instead of 140 to 100, which is very high. So as I mentioned earlier, I think there's room for ultis to have actually relatively long cooldowns and for their baseline value to be high. But in this case, I think this is reasonable in the short term because, hey, this matches other ultis, and I think ultis having relatively similar cooldowns is probably a positive. I'm not a big fan. I mean, I'm a fan of timing ultimates, but I'm not a fan of like, oh, did you know this ultimate is 5 seconds different from that ultimate? Like, I think that is a less enjoyable skill test, especially because there's not a good way to know your enemy ultimate's actual cooldown. There are probably ways to solve that. That is a different project, and I'm going to not go down that rabbit hole right now, but is a consideration. Gwen, the big thrust here is actually trying to buff Gwen jungle and identifying that Gwen top is not in a great state either. So this is a revert of the changes from, I think it was 12.13 was the patch, but 12.13 had a really good set of changes that helped get Gwen out of pro jail, and part of doing that was also nerfing Gwen jungle to make her not a flex pick. And so they specifically lowered the Gwen passive, which is, so Gwen passive does % max health damage, and that max health damage has an AP ratio, and it deals that damage on auto attack and on the center hit of Q for every snip. And that damage has a cap against monsters, and that cap went from 10 plus 15% AP ratio to 6 plus 10% AP ratio, which if you look at like an example first clear, you have 9 AP, actually ends up being a very significant drop in the amount of damage because you very clearly hit the cap because monsters have more than enough health for you to hit the cap every single time. This is reverting that exact change because that change list, 12.13, had about a 2 to 2.5% anti-jungle skew. It was win rate positive in top lane and roughly win rate neutral in jungle, and it was win rate positive in top lane to the tune of about 2.5% win rate. And so the idea is, well, if we want to buff Gwen top by about 1% win rate, and then buff Gwen jungle by 3.5% win rate, then a 2.5 jungle lever and a 1% generic lever should be about the magnitude that we want. In dev, I tried 15 flat plus 20% AP ratio, which just matches Nashor's Tooth's base damage. Like, I like starting from a point of like generic, like, and 15 plus 20% is a 308 full clear. That is way too fast. So this is basically going half as much as the buff that gave her a 308 full clear. So that was clearly unacceptable. Gwen having the fastest, like Gwen having Karthus tier jungle clear was not the intended goal here, but hey, Gwen will have certainly a fast jungle clear. And considering Gwen does not have much gank power, she has a very short dash and no CC into level 6. Yeah, she's allowed to be a fast clearing jungle. What the hell else should she do? So she'll have a fast clear. It will be well under 330. Okay, right. She's gonna have to scale, but like, hey, it's a different type of jungler. We don't have a lot of magic damage carriers in the jungle. There's like exactly Karthus kind of. At least for like pro, like we might see Gwen in pro. That's kind of cool. I think that'd be a good thing. Right, we get some more variety, less just tanks. And then again, his health growth is a just solid generic option. I'm generally trying to choose durability as the direction I'm slightly pushing the game. And so when given the opportunity, here's Gwen. She has to be in melee range. Yes, she's going to rely on her W for some teamfight durability overall. Yep, that's going to happen, of course. Yes, she has some drain tank sustained, but hey, I think Gwen does more than enough damage to be successful. Here's just some generic power. If you're bad at using your W, it's a little bit easier to play. You can rely on your base outs a bit more. Not a lot to say. Again, the goal is 1% win rate here, right? That's all I really have here. Next up is Kennen. So Kennen is getting a cheaper E cost. E, as far as I understand, is maxed last, so up until level 14. This is 20 energy off of your E. And then our cooldown now actually scales with rank. Instead of 120 flat, it's 120 to 80. Again, this matches a lot of other generic teamfight ults. It's more than a reasonable number. If we said that, oh, it was 100 to 60 and now it's 80 to 40, I'd be like, hey, we shouldn't do that, right? We should have a pretty normal ult cooldown, but it's doing this. So a couple thoughts here. Kennen is really bad in solo queue. By really bad, I mean like 47% win rate, which is like quite low, right? We usually don't have champions that low in win rate. 47 usually indicates this champion is actually weak, and it's not just a mastery case, right? In the case of like Cassandra is a mastery requirement. This champion is hard to play. Kennen is not that hard to play, so 47 means that it's something kind of structural here. And so I'm going to reiterate a theory that I said earlier, which is so pro play is much, much slower paced than solo queue, which means that pro play doesn't really care about long cooldown ultimates because every ult is up for every team fight anyway. There's not a lot of my ults up and yours isn't because a random fight broke out. This doesn't tend to happen. It can happen some, of course. Ulti cooldown buffs do in fact affect pro play, but they affect solo queue almost linearly, and they affect pro play kind of logarithmically in a sense. That's my theory. And it's like, oh yeah, here's a like low win rate solo queue champion with for his class, a very long cooldown ultimate. And so I think it comes as no surprise that a champion where some of his power is being siphoned off by having a fairly long cooldown ultimate is seen in pro play and is not successful in solo queue. I think that is a easy through line and is probably accurate. So I'm actually a really big fan of this change. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, Kennen could gain, honestly, 2.5 to 3% win rate and would still be sub 50 for most skill brackets in solo queue. The goal is not always 50% win rate by any means, but I think this champion is deserving of buffs. And I think this doesn't affect pro play that much, which I think is fine. We used to see Kennen a bit in pro play. It shouldn't take much to get him back into at least people's eyes, and I think we are going to have a really, really diverse top lane metagame at Worlds. That's actually my belief. They're going to have a really, really diverse top lane metagame. Next is a change to Senna. There was a version of the changes that had a lot more going on. Ultimately, I pushed pretty heavily to having a smaller change list because I think there was a lot of risk here. So I did not propose this change, but I was in the conversation, so I'm going to deliver what I remember from the combos, right? So Senna deals, I believe it's 8.5% less auto attack damage on critical strike. Like the way these are hooked up for Senna and Yasuo and Yone is basically there's a variable that's defined in the character's passive, and then in the character's script it says, okay, well when you auto attack, if the attack is a crit, multiply the number by this number. Or like subtract the number and then multiply this number, right? And so, in the case of like Yasuo and Yone, it's like take that number, whatever the damage is going to be, and multiply it by 0.9. And so whether you have Infinity Edge or no Infinity Edge or whatever, you take that number, whatever that number is, and multiply it by 0.9. And then in the script for Rageblade and Seething Sorrow, it says, hey, if you have Yasuo passive or Yone passive or Senna passive, grab the variable and multiply the on-hit damage by that number because we want to sort of keep it, honest there. And so, anyway, the reason this exists, the reason Senna has a damage mod on crits is August was really, really afraid on release of Senna being really overpowered with crit builds. That is the reason it exists. He was like, I think this could be really OP. It's a tuning lever. I'm afraid of her being too good with crit builds. Now, as it turns out, Senna has never been too good with crit builds. Players have pretty much always been trolling by going for the Kraken Slayer, Rageblade, Zeal type Senna builds. She has always been stronger building tank. Like Locket Senna has been cracked forever. And it's what we see now finally in solo queue is lethality. Like it took so long for Senna players to move over from Kraken Slayer to lethality. Now, people who play bot lane farming AD carry Senna still build her crit. They just built her that way, and I mean, she gets more gold income. It kind of makes more sense there. But like, it took so long for support Senna players to be like, oh, I really should go Eclipse or Duskblade or Youmu's Umbral, all this kind of stuff. It took so long. But anyway, yeah, crit has never actually been a good build for her. Or I shouldn't say, it has never been her best build. And so saying, okay, well, you know what? We can clearly alleviate this. And so, yeah, we can alleviate this. Great. And so she no longer lowers her damage on crits. So the reason I'm saying, hey, this was risky before, is there was a version of this change list that also had, it was meant as an AD carry Senna buff, bot lane farming Senna buff, by also increasing the soul drop rate for minions that she last hits. I know she's had like patch balance roller coaster ping pong before, but like soul drop rate on things that Senna last hits is just the very easy and obvious AD carry versus support balance lever. If support is ever at the right power level and AD carry is too high or too low, you can just do, oh, what's the power level of last hitting? And then you get to change only one of her rolls without changing the other. So it's like, yes, her soul drop rate is ping-ponged a lot, but like it is literally the best lever for roll-by-roll balance. It's like changing jungle mods when a champion is too good as a jungler. Like, yeah, great. Like, we don't have to mess with Wukong top. We can just do Wukong jungle balance changes, right? Like, anyway. So, to circle back, there was a version that had drop rate on stuff that she last hits. And I basically, so like my part of the discussion was like, I pushed pretty strongly. It's like, look, AD carry Senna already currently builds crit. She goes Kraken Slayer. If she builds Rage Blade, that still comes through as well. She builds RFC. This is a lot of power. Even for support Senna, like even if she doesn't build any crit, she still crits natively by getting souls. Like support Senna will gain quite a bit of win rate off this. And AD carry Senna, it's like hard to say, but like again, she actively builds crit chance. There's kind of a lot here, I think. And so, though it means we're very likely going to have a follow-up patch where if the magnitude is way off for AD carry Senna and she gains like 0.2% win rate, then we actually go do the AD carry Senna buff, right? If like this doesn't actually do anything, then we'll actually just buff AD carry Senna next patch. But I'm just very concerned that this is actually going to be a really, really significant lever, because we never, as a live balance lever, change champion crit damage, right? Like we can kind of math out what we expect the auto attack DPS like end result to be. And like we could math out what attack speed growth would give a champion. Like it is possible to math this out. But at the end of the day, it's like we can just kind of wait and see and measure it out and like see the results. And if there's a follow up in next patch, like I think it's totally fine. Like I'm personally very comfortable with saying, hey, we're gonna make a balance change. It's going to be kind of risky, and we'll just follow it up in 2 weeks. And it's like, yeah, like Trynd is a little bit OP right now. We'll follow it up in 2 weeks. Shojin and Jarvan are a bit OP right now. We follow it up in 2 weeks. Senna's going to have some kind of unknown balance state. We're going to follow it up in 2 weeks. Like, I think this is very acceptable. And, like, this is a very quick turnaround, right? Like, 2 weeks is not a long time in the grand scheme of a game that's been around for 14 years, right? Like, for 2% of League's lifetime, Senna might have the wrong crit damage, you know, or, like, the wrong balance because of a crit damage change. Like, to me, that's fine, right? So, overall thought process here. Let's move on. Thresh. So Thresh is so he got nerfed a few patches ago. So I mean, Thresh had a bit of a balance roller coaster. I tried really, really hard to get Q max to be the first best skill on Thresh. Basically, he was in a state where people tended to Q max, but it was incorrect to do so. Lantern max was his best skill order, which to me was a complete betrayal of what Thresh is about. Like, Lantern is a big deal for Thresh, but like hooks is even bigger to his identity. And it's like, I think this is really, really bad if his primary skill order is not hook max. And so I did a lot of tuning to try to make Lantern max less good. I lowered the value of shield rank up by eventually 0 to 40. I lowered the cooldown incentive from, I think it was 2 seconds per rank to 1 second per rank, or from 1.5 to 1. I then also lowered the soul, the shield per soul, to further lower the cooldown incentive because it functionally lowered the base value of the shield itself. And doing enough, finally got to the point where Q max Thresh was good. By increasing the damage rank up, by increasing the value of the cooldown rank up, by increasing the base damage via increasing the AP ratio on the ability, and then also even increasing the cooldown incentive itself to finally say, okay, no, actually, Q max Thresh is good, which I think was good. I think it was the right choice. It got into a good spot. But then, of course, Q max's cooldown got so low that the 3 second flat cooldown reduction on hit let him chain hooks together. It was too good, so then we had to lower that back down to 2 seconds. instead of 3 per hook, and then he was reasonable. A little bit weak, though. I think Thresh is a champion that is exciting. He is fun to play. He is popular. I think he's pretty inoffensive as a champion. So I am personally my highest master supports are Brand and Zyra. I am a degenerate mage support player. I think mage supports are a little bit bad for League of Legends. Not a lot bad for League of Legends, but like the game is more lethal. The game has less peel. The game is even burstier. There's no one to be defensive. Everyone's just dealing damage, and it's like, well, if the game needs to be less lethal, mages being optimal picks or near optimal picks is probably not directionally great for the game. I think mages can be viable, and that's fine, but like, hey, let's, can we move things around? General thought process. Anyway, Thresh, I think, is deserving of a relatively high spot in the popularity and power hierarchy. Personal opinion. But also, I think very strongly, Thresh is a really, really exciting pro play pick. And so choosing Lantern as the lever here, because pros are really good at using Lantern, right? It's a highly skill expressive thing. And ultimately, if his primary build is Q-Max and a W-Max, great. Those are his two coolest abilities. Play as a 1-point wonder. I max Q for 6 hooks. I get some points in shield, and I get some Lantern cooldowns, so I can throw more Lanterns out. Most Threshers don't reach level 13, so the changes from a little while back still give him more Lanterns than before. And Thresh gets to use his two coolest abilities frequently. He gets to feel awesome. Congratulations, Thresh. Good for you. Players still tend to max E second. They should really max W second. People are kind of trolling by not doing this. Maybe people will learn over time. There's not really a lot of movement. Oh well. At least with the changes I made earlier on in the year, W max and E max second are closer in power level to before, which is at least a good thing. Regardless, hey pros, make a look at Thresh. He's a cool guy. Right? Pretty good change overall, right? Cool guy. This is, I think, a fair bit of power. Also, picking up souls should be powerful, so yeah. Anyway, next up is Rel. So Rel is the, as far as I can tell, the #1 champion in pro play right now. What's nice is the Rel midscope from earlier in the year did a lot to un-elite skew her, which is cool. I think that's good work. It created Rel jungle as a viable alt build. Also pretty cool. Not a lot of players play Rel jungle. I think she's about 12 to 15 times as popular as a support than she is as a jungle, but jungle has a non-trivial pick rate. It's still around, so people are having fun with Rel jungle, so that's cool, great. We're serving some players with Rel jungle. Some people want to play that and they're having a good time. Okay, great. So we're not trying to disproportionately ruin Rel jungle. However, the unfortunate thing is that Rel is a strong flex pick. So the two thoughts here are, one, instinctively you'd think, well, flex picks are pro skewed, right? Because a pro team can pick this champion early and then flex it jungle support based on matches, based on the team comp needs. Why wouldn't you pick Rel early? Because it's a draft advantage to be able to move this champion around, and maybe they have to really pick Alistar. Or, we just ban Alistar Thresh in second rotation, and now there's no good answers to Rel, and we will play Rel support, and haha, joke's on you. We also stole a high priority jungler because we grabbed Maokai on red 3 or something. Right? All these things are possible, right? However, the other thought here is we had this exact situation with Annie earlier on in the year. And I remember that I personally pushed for us to only nerf Annie support, and we could leave Annie mid as strong, because, she's not really overpowered. Like, Annie support could go down to 50, she's like 51 and change. Like, yeah, we could easily nerf Annie support, and it's reasonable. Like, it would be totally fine to do this. But, hey, if we kind of get rid of the Annie support flex pick angle, then, she'll lose some pro prio, and then she'll be like a 40% presence mid laner, and that's totally fine. Off we go. She's not gonna eat bans anymore, whatever. And all that happened is her presence didn't move, and it just all went to mid lane. So instead of seeing some Annie mid, some Annie support, we just saw twice as much Annie mid. It's like, okay, well, so the most recent flex pick in recent memory, nothing changed when you removed flex picking. So different tactic here is let's go for a generic nerf. Of course, it will affect Rel support. Of course, it affects Rel jungle. It affects both the roles. Okay, whatever. But this is just E move speed. Basically, the way Rel E works is she gets 10% move speed on activation. If she's running toward an enemy champion or her target of E, she then ramps up another 5 to 15 move speed, which is now ramping up another 2 to 10 move speed. Or sorry. If she's not running towards an enemy champion or her target, she ramps up this much. If she is running towards her enemy target, she ramps up to 30 to 50 and is now ramping up to 24 to 40 instead. This is a 20% nerf to the amount of maximum move speed this bonus maximum move speed this skill provides. She's not actually going to be 20% slower, but she's going to go from 1.5x to 1.4x. Also keep in mind, like, Emax is her best build by quite a lot, especially at support. Players kind of don't realize it, but Emax is kind of OP. So lowering the value of that ability is actually kind of reasonable to make the build orders that are intuitive to players are actually more likely to be correct. I think it's probably good for us to try to make the intuitive skill orders the correct skill orders. I think that is just kind of wise. I will say it is very important that Rel is the fastest support. Like, that is important from a sort of like roster construction perspective. When I talk about exceptions and whatnot, it's like, it's important that champions stand out in an interesting way. She rides a horse. She's meant to be fast, right? So it's important that she is the fastest support. With these changes, she is still the fastest support, but she will be less fast. This opens up some more room for counterplay. Overall, I think these are totally reasonable changes. Rel, of course, is too strong. Her win rate is very, very high, especially in Elite. She is the number one champion in pro play. She is deserving of nerfs, and so these are those nerfs. Next is Xayah. Xayah appears to be the number one AD carry in pro play. Also, considering that Xayah is a very high agency champion, which is to say, the primary counterplay to a snowballing AD carry is to go dive them, right? If it's a really heavy AD carry meta, well, you can pick Vi, you can pick Camille, you can go dive the back line, and hey, they've got to outplay you, or the teammates have to peel, or they're going to get you. And this means that champions like Aphelios and Jinx, I think, are relatively fair champions. They have a lot of range, they have a lot of damage, but like, at the end of the day, you can't outplay Flash Apprehend. Yeah, he's kind of going to kill you. But Xayah literally immunes Vi R. She literally immunes Kayle R. Not Kayle. I mean, she would. Camille R. It's like, these abilities are telegraphed enough that anyone with skill and under 300 ping will immune your ulti every single time. Like, even Sivir, you have like the Smite Spell Shield game, which like junglers can actually win that. And so it's like, if Xayah innately shortcuts the primary counterplay to AD carries, this champion can sit below 50% win rate and be a totally reasonable champion. Because at the end of the day, it's still on you to just outplay everyone else and just be better. Like, so here's the thing I want to kind of surface. It's something I've been thinking about recently. Is I think win rate is kind of a fake stat. Because, so let me kind of break this down really, really briefly. I mean, win rate is certainly relevant. Win rate measures what actually happened, right? This champion actually did win this percentage of their games. Like, that is true. That is a measurement of what really happened in the real world. This champion won more games than they lost, or they lost more games than they won, or it was exactly 50-50. Okay, that is true. That is immutable. However, win rate as a surrogate for power is kind of fake. It's going to be directionally accurate in the sense that, like, a change in win rate is pretty much always going to correlate with a change in power. But a resting win rate, comparing two champions' resting win rates, is frequently going to be inaccurate. So, for example, many champions that are deemed to be elite skewed champions, their win rates are much higher in Masters Challenger than they are in Bronze Silver, right? The champions are not often inherently elite skewed. Sometimes, of course, they are. But frequently what's happening is actually this champion is demanding of a high amount of mastery. And it turns out that Masters players play more League every week than Silver players. Right? I think we all understand this, which means the average Cassante that you see in your games has more games under their belt in Masters than in Silver. And not only that, but the frequency at which you play a game also matters. So 20 games of Cassante in a week gives you more win rate growth than 20 games of Cassante over the course of a month. So, like, even the more spread out your games are, the less you're going to learn. And so, like, you almost actually have to double count the mastery angle here. Because, like, literally a 100,000 mastery point Masters player has learned more about their champion than a 100,000 mastery point Silver player. And not just because Masters players are inherently better at learning, though it might be true as well, but like literally the value of those games was higher because they were probably closer together. This is true, by the way. Like this is demonstrable from like looking at big data. So and by the way, this is talking about mastery as a function of win rate, and knowing that mastery and like functional mastery, right? How close the games are together, all this kind of stuff. How much have you decayed? How much you need to take some breaks? Like functional mastery is a very strong cause of win rate inflation, of win rate gain. So any champion that requires mastery is going to see natural win rate inflation with MMR. And so someone like Malphite will see his win rate goes down with MMR, but keep in mind that win rate as the game is zero sum, right? Like total win rate of the game is zero sum, which means the sum total of all top laners of the game must add up to 50 at the very end of the day. It has to add up to 50, right? This has to happen, right? This is how this works. And so the result here is Nasters has Cassantes and Camille's and Riven's who have expressed a lot of mastery and gotten very good at the champions. Someone has to go down, and that's easier champions like Malphite, right? This has to be true. Interestingly, Scion is actually a very, very high mastery champion, but is also very, very low elo skewed innately, because he really cares about late game scaling and taking farm as a top laner, which happens more in lower elos compared to higher elos. So the end result is like Scion is slightly low elo skewed, because his innate champion skew actually beats his mastery skew. But you look at pro play, and pro play actually goes long, so the whole stacking paradigm matters, and pros are really well practiced, so they also get the deep mastery curve value. And so Scion is actually just a good pro play champion because he cares about late game, which Challenger doesn't care about, but pro play does, and he cares about mastery, which Challenger cares about and pro play does. But it's like interesting, like just the various deep dives there. Anyway, circling all the way back to win rate is kind of fake. Because at the end of the day, if Xayah is a 48% win rate marksman, all that really means is it's asking you to get 4 more games of practice on Xayah to be as successful on average as like Ashe or Kai'Sa or something. You have to put a little bit more time into practicing Xayah, and that's it. And it's like, well, we're going to ask you to put in more time practicing this champion because she shortcuts the primary counterplay to your class. So if you want to access a like full power marksman with sharp anti-counterplay, it's going to require a bit more practice out of you. Lo and behold, Xayah is the number 1 AD carry in pro play. Why? Because pros can put in the time to practice a champion, and by the way, she's sharp anti-counterplay, right? I think this is logically fairly consistent. I think this is totally reasonable to say that, yeah, if the pro metagame is funnel resources into the AD carry because no lane bullies are good in current League of Legends, or not good enough to be worth practicing in current League of Legends, then we should just pick the AD carry that can't get counterplayed out of lane either. She can't die to Gwen or Rumble or Renekton because she just presses R. Right? That sort of logic, I think, holds. Now, I'm being a little boisterous, not the right word. I'm overstating it a bit here, but directionally, I think this is kind of what's happening to a small degree. Anyway, obviously, we're trying to lower Xayah's power overall. What we're trying to do specifically is say, actually, she is beatable in lane. So it's a minus some early health, but more health growth. I believe the break even is around level 8 here, level 8 or 9. So like for a large portion of players, especially at home play, and especially if you're not facing significant bullies, Xayah is going to be reasonable. This is not going to be a very big win rate change. It's not going to mean all that much, but she's going to be a little bit more all-inable, right? A little bit weaker. This is like relatively power neutral for the average player, but it does open up the no, really, we're going for lane bullies. Xayah is a lane bullyable champion. And then again, from the lane bully aspect, I think we could have increased the rank 5 cooldown on E. She does currently buy a lot of ability haste with quick blades. She lowers his cooldown quite a bit. She can obviously get multiple cast off over the course of the game. But also, like, E is Xayah's thing. And it could be that E's power budget should still go down a little. That might still be true. That, like, it can be a little bit less Xayah's thing. But I'm usually pretty loath to say we're into mid game and your primary tool is, not your primary tool. And again, we're not close to like another part of our kit overtaking what the champion is about. But I'm always a little hesitant there. That's all. And so like feedback I gave, and so we did 13-9 instead of like 13-10 or like 12-10 or something. I want to say one more thing around early game stats and lane bully ability. So this is coming from, I'm gonna paraphrase August here because I agree with his point, and so it was cool to listen to, and so I'm gonna deliver it out. So I talked about stat consistency and exceptions for exceptional cases and differences making sense. I want to talk about early game durability for marksmen specifically. So the thought process here is, what kind of gameplay does your champion have access to, and what kind of gameplay are they trying to participate in? So what I mean by that is like, hey, if I'm Caitlyn, I outrange you, and I have really, really good range for keeping you out of range. Ezreal, the same, right? He outranges you and has pretty good ways to keep you out of range. These champions should probably actually the two frailest marksmen in the game. Ashe, to a much lesser degree, can keep you at arm's reach. Like, she can slow you down, but auto attack range is much more reasonable. Volley poke, especially in the early levels, is like, yeah, it's there, but like it's not going to win you down the way that like Caitlyn autos can. And it doesn't have nearly the uptime like Mystic Shot does. It's like Ashe doesn't have innate escapes. R is really bad if you dive on her. She can try to kite you. Like, yeah, she probably shouldn't be tanky, but like she should probably be tankier than like Caitlyn or Ezreal, right? She doesn't have a dash to go backwards, and she has less actual threat range than them. Vayne, her entire conceit is that she's meant to outplay you. Like, she should have enough baseline durability to function, right? I don't think she should have Caitlyn levels of health. She has 550 range and literally 0 long range tools. Like, she has to be in auto attack range to do anything. Some baseline level of durability is, I think, more than fair, but she's not meant to tank autos. She's meant to be, flighty and literally invisible and dodge stuff. And so, in the case of, not dying to a Thresh hook, right? Ashe can't outplay a Thresh hook, but Vayne can. And so Vayne should have more room and, more ease to be all in than Ashe because she's unhookable, but Ashe is. So Ashe might be able to live one hook or one flay or something, right? Or one headbutt pulverize because Vayne can just condemn you out of it and all this stuff, right? And so it's like, okay, well, anyway, pre-6, Xayah, she has mediocre spacing tools. Q and E are okay. She has 525 range. Like, she has some range with Q and E, but like, she kind of has to just kind of trade blows with you, right? So she deserves to have, I would say, average health for a marksman at early game. You look at someone like Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa also has the evasive tools, right? She has her E. Once we get into team fights, she has R. R is obviously really valuable. She has support with W. She actually even has like pretty good burst, ability with her Q. But like, yeah, early game, Kai'Sa, again, fairly mid-rangey. Some evasive tools, again, has her E to dodge things like Thresh and Blitzcooks and Leon and whatnot. So, anyway, this whole thought process of like, what stat line are you allowed to have? And then on the other side, there's like Draven and Samira, where it's like, no, these champions, they are just meant to fight you. They're not... Okay, in the Draven case, like, he's not fast. He actually telegraphs the location he goes to. Draven should very clearly, like, he and Neela should absolutely have the most durability of any AD carry. Like, they should just be number 1 and 2. I'm just going to call Neela a marksman. They should just be number 1 and 2, right? Like, unless there's a really good reason they don't, because like some other part of the kit gives them enough durability they don't completely need it. Number 1 and 2. And I think like Samira deserves number 3. Like, yes, she has Blade Whirl to block projectiles. Yes, she has a dash, but that dash only goes forward. She gets a bonus damage for being in melee range. She's like the only marksman that like literally tells you, no, actually go fight in literal melee range. She deserves to be top 3, Like, that's the kind of shape where it's like, yeah, these should make sense. And these champion stat profiles should make sense for the types of champions they are. And it's why I was very happy to give Samira level 1 base health in the previous patch. Anyway, long tangent here, but I wanted to kind of talk about some of the structure around that kind of stuff because it's just me and I wanted to share it with you. That's the patch. Yeah. I mean, you could have just skipped the last 20 minutes and just been like, I see the note. We're done here. I'm not going to do TLDR. Obviously, you can just scroll through and see all the numbers if you're going to be one of those people. But that's the patch. Hope you enjoyed the preview. I think it's a pretty cool patch. See you next time. Bye-bye.